Hello, I'm Dr. Lisa Belisle, and you are listening to or watching our video podcast, Radio Maine, where we explore and celebrate creativity and the human spirit. Today I have with me Trainor Domingue, who is a Portland art gallery artist, certainly amongst one of the more creative individuals that I know, and I know quite a few. I happen to love her work. I've interviewed her previously for this podcast, and I'm just thrilled that you've taken the time to join me again today. Thank you, Anne.
And thanks for asking me to come back. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, the pleasure is entirely mine. I mean, I think I did a little fangirling the last time you were in. You know that I love your work. I mean, your pieces are just beautiful. And I'm really enjoying the direction that you have been going in. I keep seeing these sort of new things that you've been doing. You were doing some work with words for a while and with poetry, and you've been doing more work with abstraction. And so as an artist who's been doing this for a while, I'd like to hear where you are now and what's been going on since the last time we talked.
Just wanted to say thank you to Portland Art Gallery. You guys always have a way of displaying my work in a really creative and interesting way, and it pairs with other people's work in really interesting ways. And I always appreciate how you're quite thoughtful about doing that with my work. Sometimes I feel myself my work is a bit out of sorts as opposed to some of the other artists there, but then when you hang them near another person's work, it's like, wow, that really does look really kind of cool together, and they are both very different pieces. Even subject matter might be different, but I appreciate the eye that you and the rest of the gallery people have to present my work in a really different light than I might have seen my own self. So
I mean, I love that you're saying that. I personally can take no credit, but I would certainly say that Emma Wilson, Sean Thomas, Jess Brayboy, Kevin Thomas, that whole group.
Yeah.
And you're so right. When I go to the gallery openings and I see a piece of yours or a piece of another artist, and it's in sequence with someone else, and I think, wow, I wouldn't have put those together. That curation was actually brilliant. It tells almost a completely different story.
Right. And I've been paired with many different artists in the gallery, and each time it happens, like, wow, I don't think I would have thought of that, in that way that would have worked. And sure enough, it does. So, yeah, that's really one thing I really appreciate that.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. And your pieces are also interesting because I've seen you'll do a series, but then something really unexpected will pop up, and you'll do something in maybe a different series, or you'll do more with shapes. And I know you have a background in graphic design,
right?
So, what at any given time inspires you to say, "This is what I want to work on right now"?
Well, I think what happens, and I've done this for a long time, is working in sketchbooks. So I don't try to make a full painting in a sketchbook. I do really leave it as a thinking process and just a thought process, like a little nugget of something might have happened that day, or I saw something in passing and I'm like, ooh, I really want to remember that. Or, gee, I did that like 10 years ago. Why didn't I bring that forward? Or why did it all of a sudden pop back into my head that, maybe you really should bring this little, nugget forward, and then I'll explore it a little bit further in my sketchbook. But again, they really are thinking sketches. They're generally not a finished thought, but sometimes if you go through my sketchbooks page after page, I obviously am really digging in hard to something to look to see if I can explore this concept a little bit further. So a good example of that is how I've been using the fisherman and the girl figures together, meaning the girl could be a mom, a sister, a friend, a wife, a girlfriend, somebody that they know. Like the pairing is up to the viewer, which I hope happens, because when I title them, I try to leave the title then broad enough for them to, as a viewer, feel like they could, or they know that person, or someone kind of like that person, the way that I present them, and then they can project their own image of who they think or what that relationship is all about. And in my sketchbooks, I've tried lately accidentally, but then I intentionally did it, but I draw these little line drawings of how to connect the fisherman character and the girl character. And then at some point, I joined together the pattern of the woman's dress, and it overlapped the fisherman's garment. And then I had put no line to separate them. I just married it together and put like little fish going back and forth and this kind of thing. So it was just another way of showing relationship without changing my core subject matter. So that's one of the subject matters that I continue to develop. And then in starting my paintings is really where I've been wanting to explore abstract painting, and I've looked at it for a long time and read and tried to dive in a little bit, and I've chosen to be super playful and not so intentional when I start my paintings. So I just posted something and it had a whole series, and you would never guess that the way it started is the way it landed, when I did this post, because I'm just, I don't know, sometimes I feel I just am going to use up all this extra paint. I don't care what my lines look like. I don't care how it's evolving. And then all of a sudden I start caring, which is then I get in my head and I'm not sure I really meant to be there, and then became really direct and trying to do something instead of leaving myself open to accidents for a longer period of time. So that's kind of what I'm working on. And it's been a really interesting way and a bit different for me to work that way, which for me it's important that I feel like I'm entertaining myself while I'm painting. I don't want to be so meticulous that every single stroke or line needs to be perfect way at the beginning of my painting process. I'm trying to keep a lot more open time, and that's what this abstraction thing is allowing me to do. And then at some point, might be the next day, might be a week or two later if I've just left it leaning against the wall in the studio, that I figure, I think I'd really like to bring whatever these figures or the fish or some other imagery into the piece and then push it along to a finish. So, but it can be a distance from the beginning to the end. And sometimes I'll get a piece back from the gallery and stuff and think to myself, I don't know why I did that way, or why am I getting this back from the gallery after it's had a lot of eyeballs on it. And I relook at it and I will modify it. And generally speaking, it's a much more satisfying piece from my point of view.
It must be an interesting thing that you need to do to move from working through the process you typically use, and kind of your mind kind of goes in a pattern direction, which I think that's the way most people's minds work when they're used to doing anything.
Right.
To keeping your mind open, to saying, I don't want my mind to follow that pattern. I don't want to use the same process. I'm going to stay open. So how do you keep your mind open? How do you keep
It's been a very easy, not a straightforward way of working for me. So with that career path of graphic design and stuff in my background, things are, you've got to have things done at a certain time. You have to work with a team of other people. They have to weigh in, and everybody kind of weighs in on something, but everybody's striving already for a point of, a finish, which is by the clock, by the date on the calendar, something very, very specific. But then in doing my art, I kind of brought that same working method forward, which is why I do my sketchbooks and sketches and thinking. And it just felt normal to me. But then I hit a point within the last couple of years that it's like, wow, I'm bringing all this forward. So I'm fighting against the tide, that I am trying to go against and change my direction. But I feel as though I've got this well-grooved track in my brain that it feels more satisfying to do it over here, or predictable, or comfortable and familiar, but I really am enticed by some other people's art when they do this over here, so why can't I go over there? So now I've given myself some time in the studio where this time is to finish these things that you're more familiar with, but this time over here, if you feel in the least bit that you're going back to that older way, I have to stop and just kind of rethink. My brain is like, nope, this is your playtime. You're feeling like you want to finish and go in this direction, but try to pull back and just let this happen over here, and maybe allow sort of my more emotional side to drive where it might be headed, even if I don't know where it's going. So that's probably the biggest part, is I don't know where it's going to go. And I have to just simply have faith that I've been doing this for a while now, and generally speaking, I've learned to have a sense of, I think this is on its way, or I think this one needs to go against the wall, and not just go against the wall, but turned around and face the wall, so I can't overthink it. And it's funny because then I'll turn it around maybe a few days later and go, oh, well, that's not as bad as I thought, the territory that it might have been heading in. So that's where I've been taking this sort of new way of working lately.
I remember I've read the book on writing by Stephen King multiple times. That's one of my favorite books about writing that's out there. And he talks about putting the draft in the drawer and leaving it for some period of time so that you come back at it with fresh eyes, so that you can see it in a different way. And it sounds similar to what you're talking about with, not only are you putting it aside, you're putting it aside and you're turning it against the wall so that your brain you don't want your brain to work on it in that moment.
Right, because it's probably overworked to begin with, and I do tend to do that. I tend to add a lot of goings on in the earlier stages of my work, and I'm learning to, I think I like that part of the process. I'm going to keep it, but I'm also going to work harder at simplification and keeping what's necessary to, I hate to say tell a story with my work, because that's not really what I'm doing. I'm the underlying thinking of what I put together and how I put it together. I think that's like my story. But I always want to leave room for somebody else to feel something and make their own story. But at the same time, I'm trying to simplify then without taking away the heart and soul of the piece in favor of simplification. So, but when I use acrylic paint, which is primarily what I do use, I am very comfortable with just wiping the whole thing out and painting it all over, or sanding it all back and starting again, or putting a glaze of an overall tone over something to shift it a little bit, but not in a huge dramatic way. But if it needs it in a dramatic way, I'm like, I'll just do it now. Now I'm just not afraid of materials, not afraid of doing it over, starting over, sanding it back, that kind of thing.
I remember in our last conversation, we talked about this idea of story and how you always hope to have somebody else bring their own perspective to it, which I have always found so fascinating, because the thing that always rises to the top for me, and one of the reasons why I really enjoy your work so much, is that it just comes with a story. And maybe it's because my brain is meeting your art, and so that's where the story exists. But it's fascinating to hear you say again that you're bringing things together in a piece, but you're not necessarily wanting to specifically call out a story.
There was also a transition for me where I was primarily a landscape painter, using the landscape as the basis for creating sort of a semi-abstract, my interpretation, my impression. So I would focus and accentuate on whatever the startling part of a snapshot that I took. And then accentuate that in a larger version of whatever this view was. So I wasn't exactly painting a portrait of a landscape or seascape or edge of the water and the land, which is where I found myself finding more interesting things to work with, was on the edge of land and sea or river and forest. Or that's where I found, a lot of the elements that I like to work with. Going from landscape, adding the human figure, of which I've done a ton of figure drawing, life drawing classes, and not only in college, but for many years after that. Didn't do really anything with those drawings other than hone my drawing skills and that kind of thing. And then I've always taken snapshots, though, of people in gestural positions, whether I'm literally taking a photo or I just have my camera, remember those? Not a phone. Just a little one down by my side and just snap a photo and then go home, and it's all cockeyed and crooked, but it captured the gesture of someone sitting or standing or walking or doing something. And then from that, I would interpret that through line in my sketchbook and then build a composition from there. And then I just really had to eventually put a stake in the ground of what subject matter was I going to paint about, if I was going to, because I just have liked a lot of things, which I've thrown into a lot of paintings. It's like, you got to stop that and let's focus here. And that's when I started to say what I really loved is coastal. I love the ocean. I like the salt water. I like all the elements of working and living. And that's where my career and my thought process really kind of finally came together. And it was shortly after that I found Portland Art Gallery. But I was well on my stake in the ground was in tight, and I was already defining for myself where I was going to take my work. And now it's just continued to go on. So it's a combination: landscape, seascape, peoplescape, life and living and working near the water like that. And then it's just continued from there to be developed.
When I look at the people that you place in your pieces, there is always this connection. There is always this sense of joining with one another. I mean, it's often a sense for me when I look at it. It's a sense of caring, love, meeting, and so your description of that edge, that the meeting of the land and the sea, the meeting of the working and the non-working, it goes along with that for me, that that oftentimes it's also the edge of each individual meeting the edge of the other individual.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. So artist, friend of mine, she looked at my work, this was quite a number of years ago, and she said, "Oh, I wish you wouldn't put the buildings in there." I'm like, "Really?" And she more of a purist about landscape, only things that grow or live there and that kind of thing, like humans and humanness wasn't supposed to be in the landscape from a point of view. And that really got me thinking that, oh, well, that's actually what I really like about this. So thank you in an awkward sort of way for pointing that out for me, that may be obviously your choice, and then mine is going to be, I love the way little buildings and light shines on, and sunset, sunrise, any time of day, and how it shapes the land and the way we live in it. If you're respectful, I think is just beautiful. Take the ride here. I mean, it's pretty spectacular. If you don't live right near this, it's always like refreshing to see it again. But then how all the little homes and stuff are set on hillsides, and want to take care to have take advantage of that beautiful view, and be able to sit with it longer than like I do. I go and I live on the edge of a forest now, literally. So that's what our view is and stuff. So, but yeah, marrying both together. Taking my graphic design, it's really obvious the way that I put shapes together that, that I have some sort of history with that. And I've just always actually loved silkscreen printing, the sharpness of edges. I'm trying to mix it up a bit in my work, let edges soften into another area so that I'm not quite so linear like that. There's several things that I have in my consciousness as I'm working to just smear that line a little bit more. Don't worry that it's not crisp or whatever. Just, allow some of that casual, spontaneous line to happen, and then just leave it be without fixing it, quote unquote.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about a storm that occurred within the last few years, and it pulled a structure that had long existed on the edge of the ocean out to sea. And it was something that at the time, I believe, made national news because this was such a beloved structure. Nobody had been in it forever and ever.
Right. It wasn't actually active, that little set of
No,
buildings.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
But it meant something to people. And then when the storm came and it then disappeared, sort of, it was something that really elicited a lot of emotion from people. So the fact that you're putting your stake, here are these structures in the in-between in my pieces, and they're very temporal.
Yeah, very fragile at the edge of, and not truly not anchored, right? They possibly were anchored to the bedrock that was under the pilings, but that's a little dicey when you live on a rocky edge of the ocean versus like Cape Cod, which is sand. I don't know how that that place is going to survive some of these upcoming big storm things, but to see a structure that you thought was very stalwart and strong and standing there and providing however people think about it when you just sit and rest and look, and watch as the light changes and tides and that kind of thing. It does feel like a friend or super familiar, it's like, oh, I'm home. It's sort of, if you're a Red Sox fan and you go by the Citgo sign, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm almost there, or cross over the bridge and, now your GPS says, welcome to Maine, or backwards, welcome to New Hampshire, those kinds of things. When they're gone, that is, can be a really startling change for people, and it's hard to adjust to.
And maybe that's why you have your figures almost always holding hands.
Yeah, that simple connection. And again, it's whomever. I'm not doing it. I'm not. I haven't designed like hugging one another or back to back, front to front. It was just, like just facing. Sometimes there's a nod in the heads that they're acknowledging one another, but just simply holding hands. And I reached out, we were with our grandchildren recently, and the littlest one was doing something, and I just put my hand out a little, and she held my hand. I'm like, well, that's really sweet. I didn't know if she would actually come and grab. And at 8 years old, and she's a bouncy, energetic little one, and she did that. And it's like, that's all I'm saying. And if people would love to project anything further than that, and I try not to be too descriptive with the figures and facial features and that kind of thing. And I do like kind of a stocky character, just feels some strength and some body in that. So I intentionally do that and shape them in that way. And that's all I'm hoping, that somebody just might feel some bit of a connection to another person. And I think my story's done for that painting, and I'll move on to another. But that thread, I felt quite comfortable carrying that through. So you'll probably see more of that.
Well, I will probably continue to love these pieces.
Thank you.
So I welcome all of the ones that you bring forward, because I can see a version of something that maybe I've seen before. That's your work, but it's always entirely new. It's always reimagined in a way that appeals to me.
That's interesting that you say that too, because in working with galleries and stuff, sometimes the sense of, I need you to do 3 of these. I'm like, oh, I'm a designer again. Like I instantly had to, put that other hat on and take my apron off, because now I already, so to be able to for the gallery to be accepting of me looking at my sphere of influences that I bring into my work, allowing me the freedom to, I think I'm going to go over here a little bit. And then because I don't want to make a giant step. That's not what I do personally. Most times I'm really fairly careful, and it's like, are you sure? It's like, I don't know, and I need a bit of sureness. There's a little line in a Winnie the Pooh storybook, which I did not read a lot as a kid, but my husband has always loved this Winnie the Pooh thing, and he, Piglet and Winnie the Pooh are standing together, and I think they have their arm, it might be a back view, and they have their arm around, and Piglet says to Winnie the Pooh, I just wanted to be sure of you. And so just that little gesture, and there's nothing else going on, and they're like just walking a little path or something. I'm like, oh gosh, that is just, it's so simple, but I think it can be pretty universal, if you let it. So I try to allow the figures that I put in without being portraits to have some of that universal sensibility about them.
You also created a series that I happen to love because I love words. And when I was writing a Substack Off the Wall piece about you and your work, and Off the Wall is our online magazine that the art gallery is doing, I pulled in one of those pieces because to me, the work that you were doing, where you were taking a piece by a writer and you were subtracting out to create a different piece by this writer, it was so powerful in a completely different way. And I'm wondering what inspired you to do that at the time, and whether it's something you think you'll go back to again.
Well, that's interesting because I've loved Mary Oliver poetry, as you know, and the simplicity of how she distills down nature into these just beautiful few sentences and stuff. I find that amazing. Another person who writes about art and making art, but he's also a writer, Austin Kleon, and he's written these few art books. One title is called Steal Like an Artist, and he's funny, witty, sarcastic, but gets to the point of things. And so that's where I roughly discovered blackout poetry, where he was taking volumes of work, I think even of his own, and selecting words and then deleting everything all around it, but literally put a black line right through it, so it made this sort of graphic sensibility about it. So that's what got me first. And it's like, well, how do you do this? How do you know what words that you're going to cross over? Because you're supposed to keep a word and then keep blocking out, and then until you find another word, skip it and then keep you don't want to pre-read it before you do it. And I thought, oh my God, that's a fascinating exercise of being careful about your selections and stuff, and yet at the same time spontaneously trying to do both of these at the same time. So he really was the one that put his little poetry pieces together, and then I thought, wow, I've got this little old book over here, The Woman of Andros, I think the name of it is, and Thornton Wilder, and I just grabbed a random page. Turns out that the book is about, let's see, the environment that they're living in is on the ocean or near the water. And so as I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, that sounds kind of neat. So I kept it. And then in the end, it's a whole page of, let's say, 150, 200 words, and all I kept was maybe 12, And then it just had this unique, cool, very brief power poem in a way that changed the entirety of what that page had actually been about in that story. So I do challenge myself with this whole word and poems, and I've never thought about, I've always struggled with writing as a child. a class that I had. I think I know I was probably a freshman even in high school. In this writing class, like, now I want you all to write a composition about anything. Like, oh dear God, what am I going to write about? And I just couldn't put anything, zero on the paper. I did not know how to start writing. And I should have by then, but I just didn't know. I could spell, I could tell you definitions. I just couldn't, figure out how to write this composition thing. How do you put thoughts together? And then once I got through that class, I did finally have a method of doing that. And then I do love to read. I like novels, that kind of thing. I'm not a spies or sci-fi and things that none of that interests me, or ones that are going to scare me to death. And it's like, oh, now great, I have to try to sleep after that, So I do try to work with a word or a few words, and we'll see where that goes. I'm not sure how I'm going to integrate it in upcoming work, but you never know. It's just one of those things in my toolbox that I'll bring back out again.
As you're talking, there's so many things that come up for me. I mean, one of them is this sort of the subtraction and the idea of what you take away and what remains. And E. Cummings, the poet, he's known for the way that he uses punctuation in a really different and really brilliant way. And I think part of the power of his work is in kind of the sparing and unique approach that he's taken, or at least it was unique at the time. I think it's been copied more than once since then. Yeah. But I mean, I think that it is that deliberate placing of something unexpectedly, but then also making sure that you're not overdoing it.
Right, and it's very sparse, and the space around the words on a page is as important as the words themselves. So you can't separate the space around the words or the spacing of each word. It's like, why did he break that right there? Why is there so much space? Does he want me to think about this? And I remember being fascinated as a kid seeing that for the first time. I was like, wow, he didn't capitalize any letters. And that was like shocking to me, that you could do that, that's okay to do that. Well, as an artist, it most certainly is. I'm like, okay, then I'm with that. I'm good, So you don't have to do punctuation correctly. I'm like, no, apparently not. I'm like, oh, I think I love being an artist. It just opens up other worlds, to me, but in a creative way. Even though I was afraid of the writing piece. So now, when we write things online, like up pops AI, and I'm suggesting this word to you, I would never say that word. What computer makes you think I would ever say that word? So, and I'm a bad typist. I don't watch the screen while I'm typing, so I'm typing here. So now I don't even see those suggestions on the screens, and then I just ignore it, and then I go back and clean up my own stuff as best I can. And you can feel free to edit anything that I ever said. That's just me trying to write coherently and stuff. So, but yeah, I think this whole AI and the suggestion thing is more of an annoyance. I wish I could just figure out how to just shut it off. It's like, could I just simply write something? I don't want you to edit it because I don't want those thoughts of those words in my head. I know I say things differently. I know I punctuate incorrectly sometimes,
AI is something that I find fascinating because as somebody who's written for a really long time, you're right. When you have a generic AI something and it comes back at you, that's exactly the way that I feel. Like, this doesn't sound anything like me. I would never say this, in which case it's not useful. However, the ability to train AI so that it actually utilizes patterns that have been in one's writing before, I just find that so interesting because
so customized.
So yes,
from your language and the way that you've been writing.
Exactly.
It pulls. It's like, well, you use this over here. Maybe you'd like to
use
it again over here or whatever. Yeah, that would make more sense. in a creepy sort of way for me, but maybe I'll have to get over that as well.
Well, I think for me, what AI has done is it causes me to think about creativity in a different way. And it pushes me, AI can take, because I've been writing for such a long time, it can take things that I once did back 20, 30 years ago, and I can look at it and he'll present it back to me. And I'm like, wait, is that the way that I used to use words together? And it just causes me to think about evolving the way that I do things now. So I think for every person, it's a little different. I think if you just use it as, it's like going to the grocery store and being like, yeah, I'll take that pre-made salad. You can do that, or you can say, oh, they're suggesting I use these organic greens, and I hadn't thought about pulling in the red raspberries that are ripe right now. So I think there's different ways. It's a tool that can be used. But I don't want to go too far down the AI path, because what I really wanted to ask you is, what are some novels that you've read recently? Because I love good writing. I love great novels. And I'm wondering if there's any in particular that you've lately read that you can recommend.
I really allow the selection to, I'll choose it based on an interesting title. I don't necessarily go after an author. I did go through a series recently. Now it's not going to come to me, but I do make the selections when I choose, and I do read on a Kindle, not the regular book itself. But I do make those selections. If they actually say that it's a novel, then I'll get in there and I'll do that. I'm reading one right now. It's the partial of the title is A Whistle Stop Cafe. And I can't remember the author and who that is. I believe it's a woman, but it's a really interesting way of writing. It's you feel that you're in the South in the 40s and 30s and 40s, and then it's coming back up into the 1990s, I think, by the time this piece is done. So those kind of period pieces, and you really get a feel for the goings on in the time and in the times, I think. So, but yeah, much more of a novel person. David Archer? Oh gosh, that series was like stay up till midnight. I was like, oh no, now I have to get the next book because the cliffhangers were unbearable. So, and then move right on to the next book. So
you've got me intrigued. I'm going to have to go look up David Archer and also Whistle Stop Cafe.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for Google, because I'm sure that's going to be pretty easy.
It'll pop right up.
It'll come right in there. Yeah. So I can't finish the interview without asking you about 1997.
Yeah.
Because we asked you ahead of time.
Yeah.
And tell us about a pivotal point in your life. And 1997 was the date that you came up with. It was a pivotal moment in your artistic journey. And I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it was that for sure. So in about somewhere in 95, 96, Mike and I got together and we realized that, we are really quite compatible and stuff. So let's see where this goes. And it all went well. And we got married in 97. And for Christmas of that year, we were married in July. In December, I'm like, I think I'm going to paint a painting. Let's see. So I think it might have been in 98. We had been out west visiting his parents who had lived in El Paso, Texas. And I had never been to that area of the country before, so it was all new to me and fascinatingly different. And then drove through New Mexico, up through Santa Fe, Taos, New Mexico, and then into Colorado to where his sister lives currently. And I was fascinated by the whole American Indian, Pueblo, Georgia O'Keeffe Museum out there, another R.C. Gorman painter, printmaker, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I love all of this kind of thing. So in my usual taking more photos of landscape than people, I had taken a shot of a Pueblo setup out there. And I'm like, I'm going to make a painting. And I got 4 tubes of paint, the 3 basics, black and white, and I made this like 20 by 30 acrylic painting and put the shapes of the Pueblo and the coloration and the drier scrub brush kind of coloration into this piece, and wrapped it up and gave it to him for Christmas. And he just like stood there and he was just staring at it. I'm like, what do you think? And he's like, you can do this? I'm like, yes, because prior to that, I was all about graphic design, all about logo design, all about running back and forth, putting a lot of mileage on the car, visiting clients and illustration and all of this, and computers, of course. And he said, we've got to talk. So after that evolved me as an artist. He said, well, what else can you do as an artist? And I literally took pages and pages of this scrap paper and put all these options of jobs and things that an artist can do. And he said, well, what would happen if you started painting and stuff? I'm like, well, I don't know, as I haven't ever done that before as an endeavor, and find a gallery. And then that all started this. Why I'm here today is because he had this amazing foresight into seeing who I was. I wasn't really this designer and client person and having to do the runaround that all that entailed, and it was necessary. A lot of it was about copy, a lot of it was about art direction, and I don't think that verbiage is right for this client, that kind of thing. And then I shifted, and I was doing a lot of then small pieces of art all along the side of doing my graphic design, and then finally it was just unbearable that I didn't want to do this design thing anymore. It's like, now we got to talk, because now I need to do this full time, and I don't know how to get myself out of this sort of rat race of design. And then finally I did, and then I haven't looked back. So the end of 2012 was the last of my design work. I had tried a couple of times before that, in fits and starts of trying to step away and do my art, but I wasn't clear on the process of it, and I always had the fallback of the design thing while I was gaining traction on my own art. And then it finally happened that I was able to figure some things out, and through a lot of long talks with him, and then me trying to understand and find out about this whole gallery world and whether I should do my art that way. A lot of people I know, they market themselves online themselves. So that means they're doing their marketing, they're doing their own this, they're doing their own postings, and it's like, when do you paint? Like, I have a hard time with doing both. I know I cannot do both. And I want to have a life. I want to have a nice open weekend. I want to be able to come to the openings at Portland Art Gallery and meet other cool artists and hear their stories. And so that's, once I really committed to that, and that was in earnest, and coming to Portland Art Gallery really was a major step for me. And then from there, I've just put a lot of time and effort in trying to prepare work that challenges myself and moves myself along that path without not trying. I can be distracted way without trying, but I was just trying to focus on what I was doing. Could you not be too scattery over here, come back and focus? And then that's when things really turned around and have been on a nice trajectory ever since.
I can't help but call out the fact that took 15 years. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for people to hear that, because not only did you have the aha moment, and you had the incredibly supportive husband,
right,
and you had obviously the talent, and you had the experience, but it still took 15 years. Mm-hmm. And I think people sometimes will think, somehow I've failed because I didn't want to use that aha moment right away. But it's not a failure. It's just you need to get to whatever the next place is.
So early in the 2000s, I was an adjunct art instructor for the New Hampshire Institute of Art, which was in downtown Manchester. And I was also teaching night classes at the Currier Museum of Art's art school. And I wanted to not have to do those two jobs either. so this is, again, part of my, as I'm gradually going to a full-time painter artist, I decided, well, I was asked by the Institute of Art, could I do for the community college graduates, do their little commencement speech? I'm like, oh, dear God. Okay. Oh, whew. I was already like sweating and nervous and everything. And what am I going to write about? So what I wrote about was the reason that it took me 15 years. So, and at that point, it was already, I was probably on year 8 or 11 or something like this, where my whole thing was, as far as the direction and helping these other people who were kind of on the same path I was. And I just listed out, it probably was 15 items, and I did this, and then was I quite ready then? I'm like, no. And then I did this really great, could have been a really helpful thing, but was I personally ready or confident? Nope. And then I went this and this and this and this, and then they start laughing because I'm mirroring what they're doing too, and they're looking at each other and they're like, it's not a straight line path. It just isn't. And you're ready when you're ready. And I had, difficulties in getting and staying on this path as being an artist. And once I had found graphic design in college, that was a way for me to make money and get a job. And I did not want to work as a waitress and do my art at night and live with my friends in New York City in some 4th or 5th floor walk up. I'm like, I'm not your kind of girl to do that. I just can't do that. So I went into design and I stayed there for close to 30 years, all the while thinking someday I'm going to be doing art full time. And then it did take a while.
Which is okay.
I kept my own dream alive with the help of Mike and stuff. That was, some sense of security and really a cheerleader for me when I was doubting myself. And he would just bring up, it's like, well, you did this and this happened. I'm like, mm-hmm. And then that happened. I'm like, right, okay, all right, okay. And put those pieces together. But it does take a while. And then to maintain it is also something that felt new to me as well.
And again, it just takes one as long as it's going to take.
Right.
And any amount of time is okay. I mean, really the only thing that would have been terrible is if you had felt this calling and you had never, ever gotten to it. And
oh,
you
my
had
goodness.
sort of, as they say.
I do think of that. Oh.
Yeah. I mean, some people, they do kind of die with their dream still in them. Mm-hmm. And that is always, to me, the thing that I find sad. Yeah. And that's not you.
No, definitely wasn't. I remember having that thought in my head. We were at an outdoor show up in Rutland, Vermont, and I'm looking at all these artists and their tents and everything and going, I could do that. Not insultingly to any artist, but I could do this. It's like, what's the problem, man? Come on. And that just, that's just one more of those little incentivizers. Like, come on, you've been thinking about this. The clock is ticking. And
well, I am particularly grateful that you have made that commitment because I continue to benefit from your art on a regular basis.
Thank you for saying that. That's really sweet.
I've been speaking with artist Trainor Domingue, who is fortunately one of our Portland Art Gallery artists. She has beautiful pieces. I really encourage you to come to the Portland Art Gallery in Portland, Maine's Old Port. But if not, you can certainly see her work online. And Anne and her husband Michael are regular visitors to our Portland Art Gallery openings, which happen on the first Thursdays of every month. I've really enjoyed catching up with you, Anne. I know we see each other quite a bit, but we don't always have the chance for more in-depth conversation. But I appreciate your taking the time to come in and talk with me today.
Thank you very much for doing that. It's nice to go back and forth with someone who actually has some background in the arts and in conversations like this. So it's always really a pleasure to do so.
Thank you, Anne. I'm Dr. Lisa Belisle, and you have been listening to or watching our video podcast, Radio Maine, where we explore and celebrate creativity and the human spirit, today with Portland Art Gallery artist Trainor Domingue. Thank you for watching.